welcome to my kitchen. It's been a few days. If, like me, you don't have much of anything to do on Memorial Day but to consider the various family members who served, who maybe you lost. No picnics, nothing quite like that. Although I know that there are plenty of people out picnicking. Hopefully they are doing so safely. But as for myself, we're just kind of here. It's a little hotter than I'm comfortable with going out in anyway. So this seemed like the perfect time to unbox some of the additional ingredients. Those of you who've been following this as a series, I've been making an ancient Egyptian temple incense known as kapet or Kyphi. And we have recreated a batch. It's a 10-day plus process. The current batch is curing. It's off at Inspiration House because it is a little bit less muggy there than it is here. It's kind of surprising what a couple of townships will make as a difference. And I've been thinking, of course, I want to play around with the recipe. The two main batches of Kyphi that I've made, though we're going to call it vintages. The June 2019 vintage and the May 2020 vintage were made by the book. The only difference is the stuff I made last year used dates as a base, and this year went strictly with the translation of dried fruit as raisins. There's definitely a difference, subtly in scent, but very much in texture. More than the base, I kind of want to play with some things about what goes in the Kyphi, particularly because there are a couple of ingredients, especially in the main recipe that I'm working from, which is recorded on the walls of the laboratory room at the Temple of Edfu in Egypt, and would have been written there during the time of Ptolemaic Egypt. And you can, if you want to make the mistake of saying it was created then, I guess it's a 2,200-year-old recipe, but we've got evidence all the way back to, say, 1300, 1500 BCE that suggests an incense like this, that this temple incense was in use that far back, that myrrh and frankincense were burned at different points in the day at the temple, and this blended incense, this very complex scent, was burnt at night as part of regular temple worship and various work. We don't know 100% what all of the ingredients are, and it was an incense that became kind of mythologized, kind of storied, and so in the ancient world, particularly the Greek and Roman world, it became something that was picked up and used by magical practitioners, something that sort of mysteries were told about. It was one of those weird secret things that people forgot how to make after a while, and so it became super cool and super interesting, especially because being something that was burned at night, it was attributed to assisting with dreams and visions and sort of like opening up the human capacity for these experiences, as well as inviting spirits to communicate on that level. So, I mean, what magical user, ancient world or present world, isn't going to go, does it really work? Can I experiment with it? Because that's kind of how I started. Question.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of questions already. One is there a shelf life for the finished Kyphi?
To my knowledge, there isn't a shelf life for the finished Kyphi. Everything I have read attests that it gets better the longer it ages, much like wine and some cheeses. What I can say from the stuff that I made last year, when it was still pretty much raw, like it was finished, but it had not had time to cure, it smelled good. It had a rich scent to it, very subtle and nuanced, much like how it was described in the works of Plutarch and Dioscorides and a number of other classical writers. And the stuff, as it aged over time, that scent only got more complex and deepened. So the stuff that has been allowed to age is a very different experience when it is warmed. This is an incense that you shouldn't burn like we do with most of the Western incense. You're not trying to like get a hot coal kind of look on it. You actually warm it a little bit more like you would warm, like those little scented wax pucks. You need it at a little higher than that. So unfortunately, like a Scentsy thing is not going to work because they only burn at, I think the temperature somebody quoted to me was 96 degrees Fahrenheit. And what is ideal for this, for Kyphi, for the finished product is uh, 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit maximum. You can get away with 150, but at 150, it's going to be a very, very slow release. But the good news with that is you use it up much more slowly. It is this sort of like simmering release of the scent. And the longer it sits for me, I've got it in a couple of different things. I've got some little like wooden, almost like little treasure chests that I've put it in. And I've got this terracotta bowl jar thing that I've got it in. So things that allow for a little bit of breathing and a little bit of passage of moisture. So it's not like, hermetically sealed in plastic. And that seems to be like the most optimal way of storing it. And while it will harden and get like less squishy over time, the scent improves significantly.
Do you think that a candle burner with some tinfoil would work for burning the Kyphi or for heating the Kyphi?
A couple of people who have had access to the Kyphi and who had a candle burner with some tinfoil have said that it worked fine for them. So that is one option. I know I've been mentioning Bakur burners and a couple of more high-end things that have dials on them that let you kind of choose from like 120 degrees on up to like 280. I've mentioned hot plates. And honestly, you could just use your stove. The only downside with that is unless you're really truly a kitchen witch, that's not necessarily like your sacred space or your altar. And you will, especially if you're trying to like do it while cooking or anything, like you're going to miss some of the subtleties of the scent if your kitchen smells like garlic all the time, which isn't a terrible thing. Like kitchens should smell like herbs and garlic and wonderful cooking.
Maybe not so much onion.
Oh God, that was too much onion the other day.
Yeah.
I made some very sad ramen because like I grabbed
It smelled amazing.
It was too much onion for me. Like it probably wouldn't have been too much onion for somebody else who was like really into onions, but it was also not the flavor profile I was going for. I grabbed my dried minced onions and like I forgot to check. I just opened it and it did not have a little sifter top, so I just went doo doo, ooh, and had about a fourth of a cup of dried minced onion in my single serving of homemade ramen, and that was
it's so fun.
That was sad because I hated like wasting the onion too. Like I at least had something else cooking in the slow pot, so I was like scooping it out hurriedly and like trying to like move it from one thing to the other, but it was still way too much onion.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
It really was too much onion. Anyway, cooking adventures with me.
So, do you think that lotus, lavender, or orris root could be used in Kyphi?
Orris root is one of the clear substitutions for calamus root, otherwise known as sweet flag. So I know for sure orris root can be substituted. Lavender, I'm not sure about, although it is, native to the Mediterranean. If I were to substitute it for something, it would probably be the lemongrass because of its scent. There's that lemony sharpness, kind of a citrusy sharpness to it. Lotus, it's weird that there isn't any indication of lotus in at least this incense, and I haven't run across much about lotus root in any of the stuff that I've currently turned up or researched, and I'm not sure why. It would be worth experimenting with. For me, I'm curious if lotus root has more of an earthy scent with a little maybe sweetness to it. There's a regular ingredient cyperus grass, and the rhizomes are used. And it is, in my opinion, like one of the reasons that Kyphi has as unique a scent as it does. And while cyperus grass is not particularly, expensive or hard to acquire if you live in one of the areas where it is, it's not really like harvested, especially not here in the States. It's a grass rhizome. You can find it in, since it has a role in Ayurvedic medicine. I got like the first version of it that I bought was from India. The second shipment I got was from South Korea. It has a role in traditional Chinese medicine as well. And I have been kind of like trying to track something down that would be a workable substitute for that. Because again, it's not rare or costly. It is hard to get a hold of based on just what is available in an area and what's valued in an area. I had been kind of racking my brain of like, would something with like a little bit of ginseng work? Lotus root might be something worth exploring as a substitute for that as well.
Neat. A couple of folks are saying, like, how do we not know you were this into herbalism?
Oh,
And I have a comment. I have a comment for you, because let me tell you, making Michelle's website has been
God.
one of the biggest challenges that I've faced, is like in any of the websites that I've designed, because there are so many different things, some of which go together, but mostly they only go together because you're interested in them.
So the story, like I have been into herbalism since I was tiny. I'm if I wasn't born in the time that I was born in, I'm pretty sure they would have like sent me in for counseling or something, because in fourth grade there was this book on poisonous plants that I must have checked out 15 times. I mean, I read this thing from by the time I was done with it, like it had notes in it that I would just kind of like pretend I hadn't left because like I'd been trying to cover something. Anyway, so fascinated with plants as medicine. And I can tell you exactly where it started. I was an early heart patient. I was born with a heart defect, and I was on a medicine called digitalis. Digitalis was used to prevent what they used to call dropsy, which honestly is just congestive heart failure. So it was prescribed to me to like kind of deal with the fact that my heart was not doing all of the work that it needed to be doing. And I was a curious kid, so when you shoved medicine in my face, I asked what it was. And I also had a family that explained things to tiny people as if they were adults. Like if I had the ability to ask the question, they felt they could at least give me the answer. So I learned about digitalis coming from a plant called foxglove. And foxglove, a lot of people have growing in their gardens. It's an ornamental flower. It's this gorgeous, like these big spikes of these very elaborate flowers. They're beautiful. And this medicine that saved my life, that kept me alive for the 5 years that I needed to be alive, 4.5, to get to my final heart surgery, came from a plant. And I thought that was just cool as shit. So of course I wanted to learn about like, and I also was taught that digitalis, like I shouldn't just go out and eat foxglove, because although you could get a medicine from it, it was also poisonous. And that really fascinated me. Like, here is this thing that can heal, but is also poisonous. Like if you use it the wrong way, it can kill you. Which of course led to the fascination and, checking out a book on poisons maybe an inappropriate number of times at 10, because I was maybe smarter than I needed to be for anybody's own good. But it led to, in the very early 90s, I used to go from convention to convention, mostly gaming conventions. And when I wasn't running a game at the conventions, I was selling stuff at my little shop called Wanderlust. I made my own incense blends, sticks and cones, like bath blends and things like that. So basically I ran like a traveling witchcraft shop. I resisted the urge to call myself a witch or to call it witchcraft, because also at that time witchcraft was in this phase where, at least where I was at, it was very aggressively tied to what I'm going to say, it was a pretty toxic form of feminism, exclusionary feminism. Like everything had to be like, hardcore binary female, like, let's do a visualization and get in touch with our inner wombs and like, I don't know, do vulva magic. And it just turned me right off. As I was going through my own process, I realized part of that is I didn't fit in that binary at all. But because that was really where things had swung, in part as a reaction against patriarchal religions, it pushed me away from witchcraft and calling myself a witch at all. So if you'd met me in 1991 and you'd see me doing any of this stuff and you're like, oh, are you a witch? I would have given you a very stern talking to and been really clear that that was not a word that I chose for myself. But I never, let go of or abandoned my curiosity with it. In walking the Twilight Path, which is sort of like my personal Book of the Dead, there's a whole section in the back of personal proprietary blends of incenses, particularly that I've used for meditation, for spirit work, for a whole host of things. And, had experimented with like widely before I put them into that particular book.
Neat. So for people who are just all about the plants are amazing, plants as medicine.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations that you would give people who want to learn more about herbalism? I mean, books, videos, classes.
Anything that Adam Sartwell does with the Temple of Witchcraft, and honestly, like the power trio of Christopher Penczak, Steve Kenson, and Adam Sartwell. There's a book that they've got on plant spirits, and I like a lot of their approach with that. I know that they are not the only ones out there. The thing is like I can only buy so many books and read so many books at a time, and the past few years it's been more focused on research on demons and demonology, the Book of Enoch, early biblical and extra biblical texts, and most of those are like really big chunky textbooks, as Illyria can attest. So most of my expenditures for books have been there, and not, which basically means that I'm not caught up to date with what is the best stuff out there. So I'd say poke at the Temple of Witchcraft, because they probably have some great recommendations as well as their own work.
Yeah, they have a ton of really good stuff.
Yeah.
There aren't too many questions right now, so if you want to get started with some
I actually, these showed up a few days ago, and they've been in quarantine jail in the garage. So most of what this is are things to kind of explore as alternative ingredients in Kyphi or in incenses that are similar to Kyphi. One of the things about like that whole process of making an incense from a base of dried fruit and honey and wine is that Kyphi was not the only incense that was made from that base. There was a whole host of types of incenses, and I kind of want to play with the base, and then what else can I make? What other types of things, like what purposes can I craft them for based on the ingredients? And that led to a purchasing of a couple of different things. Hello. Excellent. Which maybe I can get. Is this going to be an easier site? This one is just put together really weird. Of course, I picked the one that's hardest to open. Ha!
Success.
There we go. Not as hard as I thought. All right. So, this. I was hoping this would be the one. So one of the ingredients in Kyphi that I thought was really weird, but it seems to work, is pine nuts. And I spent some time. One of the things that I was trying to do with the original Kyphi I made last year was I tried to source ingredients from the same places, broadly the same regions that the ancient Egyptians would have had them imported from themselves. My pine nuts ended up just being like pinyon pine, like mostly American Southwest source, and I couldn't find them anywhere else. But nuts.com had Mediterranean pine nuts, which have a different shape to them. And I'm actually going to open this up because they're kind of neat. I think I've got some to sit side by side with. but like they're longer and thinner. And I'm not sure that they do so much for the scent of the Kyphi, but they do a lot for the texture. You squish them down basically into nut butter. There was someone who, when we were going through the recipe for the Kyphi, which I still need to type up and put on my site for everybody, by the way, keep poking me. It's been unexpectedly busy with all the live streaming and interviews, like with Jeff and whatnot. So keeping track of everything I'm doing has been a challenge.
All the great questions and track of
Yes,
Patreon.
so much. Oh my God, yeah, the Patreon has just exploded, and there's so many wonderful conversations. And like, I'll pop on and I'll start answering like 3 questions, and before I know it, 5 hours have gone by.
Such good problems.
Somebody had mentioned that they were allergic to pine nuts, and would there be a workable substitution, which led to also this order from nuts.com, because I was like, well, what would be a good substitution, like texture-wise, and how about sunflower seeds? So I want to, oh, this is heavier than I thought.
Oh, hello.
This one I opened up ahead of time because, you know, I'm just being an ad for nuts.com here.
Now you're escaping from the camera.
No, it's okay. I'm getting there. All right, these are organic poppy seeds.
There's a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
About. Well, I guess there's only one question. Why don't you have your own TV show? But there's a lot of people hopping on saying that would be great.
I mean, yeah. there's actually a whole lot of reasons why I don't have my own TV show. The first answer is it's not because people haven't tried to hook me up with something before. There's been a number of things I've turned down, God, since, I'm trying to think of the first one. There was one that was really cool that I think I can talk about now, because it's been about 10, 15 years since we were pitching it around. And the end result was I actually had to say, I don't think I could do this physically, like, because of my allergies and some physical limitations. This is the coolest idea, and I have to pass. It was an American medium in Southeast Asia, traveling from like village to village and meeting with indigenous practitioners and trading techniques with the folks there that do exorcisms, and energy healing and you know, deal with spirits, and just comparing perspectives. And I thought it was the coolest idea ever, like kind of Anthony Bourdain meets the Ghost Whisperer. And one, I'm allergic to shellfish and seaweed, and a whole host of other things. So I'm like, oh, food's going to be hard. But I'm also really, really heat sensitive, and I don't really travel very well, especially if it's heat and stuff. And you know, that, and also being, I hate to say immunocompromised, but it is a consideration. I do get sick easier because of the heart surgeries and my early stuff. So I don't think of myself as disabled. And I don't really think of myself as immunocompromised, but I do have to admit there are certain limitations that I've gotten very accustomed to living with, and that really would have pushed beyond those boundaries. So I had to say, if it works for somebody else, cool, and I will be happy to like consult and give you some tips, but I don't think it can be me. Those physical limitations are one factor for turning some other things down. And honestly, the other limitation is I'm not going to do it if it's not genuine. If it's just there for scare factor, if it's just there to sensationalize stuff, I'm just not going to do it. It is not important enough to me to compromise what I believe in to have a TV show hit or not. You know, all things considered, I have just as much fun and really like just being able to let people in my kitchen hang out, chit chat, do whatever. I get a lot more out of this than getting schlepped around the country and having somebody like, you know, it's
trying to wrangle you, trying to move from hotel to hotel.
Yeah. Everything's pretty complicated on the back end of the entertainment industry, and reality TV especially. And there's always compromises you have to make, and there's battles you have to choose. It helps to have an entertainment lawyer. It helps to have agents. I don't have either of those anymore, actually. The entertainment attorney I had with stuff with that was connected to Paranormal State, and we'll just kind of move on from there. Suffice to say that if he hasn't managed to get me the $6,000 they owe me by now, he's not my entertainment lawyer anymore.
Well, and I guess the I don't know, like we were having another really good conversation on the Patreon the other day about how, you know, I think the question started as like, what would your ideal paranormal TV show look like?
Yeah.
And it moved around to like, can a TV show even really capture the experience of like what it's like to experience some of this stuff?
Well, okay, so like the most
I know, like there's interesting.
You'd have to follow me around 24/7 with a camera, but also follow my friends around. Think about what happened yesterday when we were on the phone with Kat.
Yeah, no, seriously.
And we're in a Discord call, and it's Kat Rogers and Illyria and myself and another friend, and we're just talking business and horsing around. And notably, this is important, Kat is with her headphones, and like there's some stuff going on in the background. And the only thing, she's on push to talk, so you can only hear her talking with her voice. There's nothing coming through from the background in terms of noise or anything. That's important because we're driving home, and I'm just like, man, why is Mac the Knife playing in my fucking head? Like, I can't get it out of my head. It popped in a little bit ago, and it's just at the, like, you know, pull it out, and then, Sue and old Lucy Brown. And Kat was like, she just started laughing. And she's like, I'm going to send you a screen grab of something that's playing behind me. And it was an old Sinatra. And basically, she was playing it in the background. And it was turned down low. She was mostly just, you know, it was not coming through. Like Illyria can attest. It's not like, you know, I subliminally heard this playing. It was just in my head. Mm-hmm. And that happens so frequently, it's ridiculous. I mean, to the point where we're not surprised about it anymore. But if you wanted to do a show on psychic ability, to me, the most telling stuff, the stuff that really made me a believer that there's really some shit going on here, it's the day-to-day little things of just anticipating what somebody wants, plucking a thought out of somebody's head, picking up midstream on a song that the person next to me is thinking in their head but has not been humming, and then just watching them be astounded when I start finishing the rest of it because it's popped into my head for no reason I can determine. I don't know how you'd do a show around that, short of having, I don't know, my whole life wired.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking about trying to, you know, do little mini journal entries, talking about the things that I see that happen in your life regularly. And that, I mean, among all the people that we know, and there's too many. Yeah, there's way too much. It's like I swim in it now. And B, like none of it is even really believable if you're not there. Like,
yes.
Like anything that happens could be made up. It could, like, it's so, it feels so personal. Like it should be campfire stories was what one fellow suggested.
I mean, like at this point, the stuff that regularly happens to me, if you're not there, it's just going to sound like, I don't know, like I'm either delusional or I'm making shit up to sell myself as a medium, or I don't know. And I do have like some thoughts, but I also realize that right now where we stand with the world and COVID and everything else, I think it's dangerous emotionally to try to imagine the shape of the world on the other side of this, because to try to project what that might look like means maybe investing in hope for a certain outcome that might not happen at all. So when it comes to, you know, could I, should I, would I have my own TV show, I don't know what TV on the back end is going to look like when we're done with this.
That's fair. Yeah, lots of just support in the comments. Like, yes, if you can't have a TV show without being true to yourself, then that makes sense. And like,
but I mean, hey, good. But there's things like this. Like I can live stream simultaneously to Facebook and YouTube. It's not hard. At this point, even with my very limited technical know-how, this is pretty decent. the sound's not terrible, the picture's not terrible, and I mean, this is a very crude setup. Like literally there's an iPad here, there's an iPhone here, the iPhone's on a stand that is meant to be a selfie stick that has like a little tripod on it. It is
actually we can probably like move one of the views around.
I mean, and of course Illyria is on a Apple,
laptop.
Yeah, little laptop, following along, feeding me the questions as you guys comment. But we can do we can do a little show with that. I mean, how cool is that? You guys can talk to me, I can talk to you. I can open morenuts.com, order things, and realize that their packaging is such that you can't really tell what the fuck's in any of them.
I'm pretty sure YouTube doesn't have language guidelines the way video shows do.
I try. Okay, so there was a point, and I was on Darkness Dave. I was on one of Dave Schrader's radio shows, and I didn't realize that they were on a thing where the FCC kept track of them. It was me and Chip together, and Chip and I both individually are pretty foul-mouthed, but you get us together and like we are just awful. And something came spilling out of my mouth, and I'm to this day I'm not 100% sure that they didn't get dinged with like a $50,000 fine. And I felt really bad, so I sort of half-assedly try to bleep myself, and it just sounds very disingenuous when I do. Yeah, hey, look, this is how the sausage is made.
There it all is.
Okay, so some of the fun things I've got to like maybe play around with, I've got medjool dates and Turkish figs, which are part of that region and actually appear in a couple of incense recipes that are unrelated to what appears on the walls of Edfu, but do appear in something that we know as the Leiden papyrus or the Demotic texts. It's called the Leiden papyrus because half of this papyrus lives in Leiden, Germany, in a, was that seeable? Whoops. Sorry about that. Learning experience. Anyway. Now everybody's going to be like zeroing in, trying to like read stuff. Please don't send me stuff. But a couple of other things, like, so if you're making the base of this incense with dried fruit, what other fruit can we use? So, I've got 2 different types of figs, and I picked up black mulberries and white mulberries. I've got black elderberries in the fridge that I'd actually picked up to make like some immune things. I make tinctures too, by the way, medicines and stuff. So I've got the black elderberries originally were bought to go in with this honey liqueur called Baronjäger. Let me back up.
Which is delicious.
My belief in tinctures, I can't drink alcohol, by the way, so none of this is stuff that I can use, which is ironic, but when I was trying to learn how to make tinctures way back in the day, it was when everybody said, like, make it an Everclear, like the highest alcohol content is what you need. Everclear was impossible to get a hold of where I was at. Like, you had to drive all the way over to like somewhere in backwoods PA to even try to find it. At which point I was like, well, screw this. I need an alcohol content above this proof. Cool. Why does it have to taste like fire water? Why can't we put it in something that has a taste that will be at least somewhat palatable? So, I worked with my friends who could drink alcohol, did a lot of learning on like what different alcohols and liqueurs were like, and came up with a couple of things, one of which is a gargle that is based out of Goldschlager. And so it has sage. It's in a Goldschlager base, and it has sage, cloves, hyssop, angelica, and a little bit of star anise. And that will clear you right up. If there's anything in like nose, throat, tonsils, whatever, like that is good stuff to gargle with. I don't recommend swallowing it. It is incredibly strong. Not just because of the Goldschlager, but just all of the other stuff that goes in it. And then Baronjäger is to brandy, Baronjäger is to mead, what brandy is to wine. So it is the distilled high proof version of it. It's a honey liqueur. And honey has been used as a medicine for, way, thousands of years. It's a fantastic substance. It's, one of the only foods that doesn't go bad. Like, it'll just last forever. It crystallizes if you don't keep it a certain way, but anyway. So Baron Jaeger and elderberry, and I made you use some of that.
Yes, you did. It was very good.
It's very strong.
It was very effective.
It probably, I mean, just from the scent, it smelled like old school, like great grandmama's.
There was some punch in that.
Yeah, like great grandmama's cough syrup is what that stuff smelled like. So I can only imagine what it tasted like, and it at this point it is like this thick, like black purple stuff.
Folks are suggesting that would be a good thing to have in the shop, and that actually.
I don't think that I'm allowed to sell that.
Oh, really?
It's alcohol. There are some very specific rules about selling that stuff and selling it as a medicine.
Gotcha.
and things like that. So like all of those I can only I can make them at home. I can use them for folks here at home. I might be able to gift things out to friends, right. But I cannot there's a whole Food and Drug Administration and alcohol and firearms, lots of rules.
And the post office does ask about shipping liquids, now that I think about it.
Yeah, lots of rules against that. So I would cheerfully share recipes for it, but I can't sell the stuff itself. Anyway, so
that actually reminds me. You should mention that we just put a new product in the shop though today.
Did we put up the link for the Kyphi pre-orders?
Yes.
Okay, so Kyphi Vintage of May 2020, not packaged or ready to ship yet because it won't be cured until sometime in September. But if you want to get in on that, we've got it in very small, 9 pellet things. We started from getting ahead of myself. We've tried a couple of different ways of packaging and reselling it, and these hand-rolled 9 little bits can go in a tin, and $15 seems like a price that is a much easier price point for people, allows you to have it and make use of it. The one downside is the pre-rolled things are a lot harder to try to break into smaller bits. I roll them so that they are individual, single use. A useful thing about it is this stuff has a strong enough scent that even if you don't burn it and you want your jewelry drawer to smell like it, or you want your a little chest on your altar to smell like it, take one, put it in there. You will have it permeate that whole space. It's a very potent scent. Anyway, so you can get in on the pre-orders now. And I think we've only got 20 that we've done, because since we haven't gone through the whole process of hand rolling it, I know for sure that we'll have 20 of that, but I don't want to sell more than we may end up with that batch. The good news is, though, since I'm, still stuck in lockdown and there's not necessarily much of an end in sight for it, depending on how things go, I might just make another batch.
Well, and we've still also got the batch from last year, the 2019 original batch, which has some different ingredients and a different overall feel.
Well, there's one really there's 3 more logs, but I want to keep 2 of them for me. But there's 1 more that can be rolled and prepared. I'm not totally sure how many little balls and beads that's going to make. Probably as many as 12 individual packages and possibly more than that. But the other thing I have, and I think we'll do that as another live stream, maybe later this week, maybe not, depends on time, is when I was invited to participate in Haunted Salem Live for the Travel Channel. One of the things that we're really interested in was the Kyphi, particularly as this sort of unique way of opening somebody's third eye and inviting a spiritual experience. And you can see a little bit of that. I did that with Jack Osborne, which was super cool. Kyphi was a part of that. But I know TV. I knew TV really well. And I knew that the way in which traditionally made Kyphi burns does not look very impressive on camera. And if I say incense, they're going to expect smoke. So what I started to experiment with in early October, when I was in negotiations for being on this thing later, I was playing around with using the original June vintage of Kyphi, a little piece of it as kind of like mother, kind of like think of it like the sourdough base. And then I made some adjustments to the additional ingredients. I treated that base almost as if it were the fruit base. And then I made something that was a little heavier in resin and a little lighter, obviously, in fruit and in honey, so that it could be burned on a charcoal and it would release more clear smoke. It would be closer to what we are accustomed to seeing for an incense here and now, but have all of the same ingredients and feel, not necessarily in the same measurements and quantities. So there's a very small quantity of this sort of like middle step Kyphi that was one of the experiments that led to what I used on Travel Channel. And it's a little heavier on lemongrass and it's a little heavier on myrrh, but overall is still pretty much the same thing. It has cured since then over at Inspiration House, and honestly has just been sitting in a closet on a cookie tray sitting on top of some parchment paper. Haven't done anything with it beyond like the little piece that I had experimented with back then. So that is something that we can also package up. And this is why I'm starting to say I'm just going to have to identify each batch as a vintage, because each one has little subtle variations, since this is a handcrafted thing, since it does have so many moving parts. And by the end of it, there are subtle but noticeable differences in texture, in how it burns, and in its scent. But fortunately, so far, not noticeable differences in its effect, which is pretty cool. Okay, actually, I'm less interested in the nuts.com order because I'm realizing it's dried fruit.
I mean, I'm interested.
Yeah,
but that's more for snacking.
Yeah, well, and some of it is for snacking, because I don't know that I'm going to use all of the black mulberries. Well, part of my goal with this was these are all food things that I can experiment with, and if I really don't like the way it turns out, then we can eat them.
Yeah,
like
I like this plan.
I'm practical. One of the other things I picked up, this doesn't go in Kyphi, but I think I had mentioned in the last stream something called Agarwood or oudwood or aloes wood. There's a particular type of tree that when it catches a fungal infection, I almost said infection.
That's a new kind of special problem.
That's just bad. Anyway, there's a particular type of tree that when it catches a specific type of fungal infection, the way in which it reacts, its wood changes with this infection, and it creates what we know as aloes wood, or agarwood. It can be found in the wild, and it is prohibitively expensive, like tens of thousands of dollars for ounces of this stuff, depending on like its quality and where it comes from. I mean, like, whoa. But it is something, if you've, like me, read through like the ceremonial magical grimoires, the Solomonic stuff, and even the demonic magical papyrus, they mention aloes wood fairly frequently as something that is burned in a lot of the spirit summonings and dismissals. And anyway, it's a key component in a number of ancient incenses. And it was something I'd never had access to, and found a little Etsy shop that looked less sketchy than a couple of them did. Because again, this is uber expensive stuff, but they've started to basically grow it on plantations by growing the tree it comes from, drilling holes in those trees, and intentionally infecting the trees with a probiotic mixture to basically make like synthetic pearls. They're not technically synthetic. What's the word for the fake pearls?
I don't know.
I can't. I'm blanking on it. You can basically make an oyster make a pearl. but they're not as cool as like the random or as valuable as the pearls that the oysters just make on their own without people like poking up oysters.
Like grown? Is it? I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, it's been a day. I'm really warm. That's my excuse. I'm sticking to it. Anyhow, so this is Vietnamese Agarwood, which is reputed to be sweeter in scent. It is probably the only powdered wood that is more expensive than sandalwood, and sandalwood is pretty precious as well. Oh,
cultured.
Thank you. My God.
Wonderful. You're all wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. It's rare that my brain just words run away from me, but when they do, they are just off and gone. Hun, smell it, because you know what it smells like. You'll know what it smells like.
No, I won't, but I'll want to keep smelling it.
It's the closest to those rhizomes, to the cyperus stuff. Like that earthy kind of sharp. I'd have to burn it.
I like this better.
Well, I mean, I am really tempted to buy like one of the 0.02 ounces, like literally a wood chip of the actual stuff that is the resin that this comes from, because it kind of will in Buddhist stuff, like the wood, the infected wood is carved into charms and is believed to help chase off spirits, and especially like there's little charms that children that you put the bracelet on the baby or near the baby to protect the child from spirits and other sort of like supernatural harm. It's also burned to assist in meditation. It's believed to help clear the mind and give you focus and really heighten your inner perceptions. So it is a many-storied substance. I'm gonna plug in my little bakur burner.
Okay.
And get a little bit of tinfoil on there, so. Feel free to poke me with questions while I do. This will be my first time smelling this burned, by the way.
I'm just gonna say that everybody on here is either really smart or really psychic, or I'm just really good at communicating how much I like that smell. Because you're all entirely right. I will be speaking down here to smell it at 2 a.m. I don't know how you knew that. But that's definitely a thing.
It's a really, and it doesn't smell like anything I've ever.
No.
It's close to the rhizomes. It's closest to the rhizomes in that earthy. It's not sharp, but there's a almost.
It's pungent.
Yeah.
But it's not unpleasant in any way.
I'm just fascinated by the fact that a lot of these really, really rare incenses are basically pearls from trees. They come from trees that have been stressed out, or trees that have been wounded, or trees that are fighting off an infection, and that's where we get these really rare things. And it begs the question to me, who thought to burn it the first time? Who was like, oh look, here is this janky tree that is all full of a fungal infection from the inside out. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna burn that shit.
Or just warm it up so much that it smells wonderful everywhere. Oh my gosh.
Or even more than that, the gum that comes out of frankincense trees or myrrh trees. Who figured let's burn that, let's chew that. Actually, since frankincense and a number of the gums are chewed for their medicinal purposes, let's just chew this weird sticky stuff that's dripping down the tree. I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna unplug you for a moment.
Oh yeah, go for it. Try not to.
Yeah.
Knock everything over again.
Put that here. Maybe, I don't know. Here, I'll give it to you.
Good plan. Good plan.
I'll be back in frame in a minute, I promise.
All right. I'm trying to find. There was a question earlier that I'm not going to remember exactly. In fact, I'm remembering it so inexactly that I should probably just open up the chat over here.
Okay.
There's a point where I can't go back for it to find it.
Now I have Mac knife stuck in my head again. The reason that there's a big old bag of poppy seeds is one of the theories that one of the ingredients in Kyphi is opium. Now, let me say, you can't get opium from poppy seeds. That's not going to work. But if, on the theory of plant familiars or plant spirits, which is something I've read about, but not necessarily something that like completely resonates in my own practice. If poppy was something that was part of Kyphi, maybe having a little bit of poppy seed to add to it, what does that do? How does that influence stuff? So I was curious to kind of get the feel and the flavor without obviously the opium, because that would be horrendously illegal.
Yeah. So here's an incense making question for you.
Okay.
What are the tools required for making incense? Not the ingredients so much, but like all the other stuff.
Well, if you're talking about this type of incense making, it's radically different from how we make incense sticks and incense cones. For this style of incense, at the very least, you need a big copper pot, and it needs to be unlined copper. And the reason for that is there is a chemical process that's going on as you are boiling down the fruit and the honey and the wine and all the other ingredients. And I have tried to make the stuff in just a plain old stainless steel pot, and it isn't as rich. It doesn't have quite the same scent. Now, notably, the stuff I made in the stainless steel pot also did not sit for the whole like full 10 days of putting it together. Like, it was the attempt at making basically quick, cheaper Kyphi to see, can we get sort of a similar response? So at the very least, a big copper pot. And I found that I needed, for these big batches of Kyphi, 2 copper vessels, one large, one small. There's a step along the way in making traditional Kyphi where you melt frankincense into honey, and you are instructed to do that in a copper vessel for a couple of reasons. The chemical reaction is one of them, but also this particular copper vessel, we still sell them for candy making because they are ideal when you are working with something that is really high sugar based, and it has the right heat convection, and it handles heating the sugar up to the temperatures that you need better than your average thing. All right, so there's a tiny little bit of agarwood. I suspect a little bit is going to go a long way.
So it's agarwood?
Agar, A-G-A-R wood, or aloes wood, usually spelled separate. Agarwood is all one word.
So, dun, 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 dun.
And it is also known as oud wood, O-U-D, W-O-O-D. Oh, wow.
Is it already there?
Oh my
I'm
God.
coming over there.
Wow. So the Vietnamese stuff is reputed to be more sweet than most of it, but it's sweet, woodsy, earthy. There's a must, sort of, but not bad
It's like
must.
going for a walk in the woods, but there's no bugs and it's not wet and you don't have to put shoes on and you can be in your pajamas.
The sweetness is
That's amazing. It actually smells a little bit like it might be scorching. It smells a tiny bit like that thing you get when you're like drilling through. Oh, that's
yeah,
so
just
good though.
this is why, like, the Adder Mist Bakur burners, the electric ones, are nice to a point, but also why I went on an internet search to try to find one that let me control the temperature, because this just pretty much heats up to one temperature.
Yeah.
That's
And that's
clearly
probably
like over 200 degrees.
Yeah, that looks real toasty already. Poor Agarwoods. Come back to me. You are too good.
Wow.
And until I'd embarked on this, like when I used to make incense, I'd either use like the blank punk sticks and mix essential oils into stuff and like just basically shake and bake with the blank punk sticks. So you're infusing this, the traditional incense stick, there's a little stick, there's like this funky stuff on the end of it. Sometimes it's black because the base is charcoal, and sometimes it's brown because the base is more this resin and wood that doesn't really have much of a scent to it. But it's self-lighting in the sense that if you put a flame to it and you catch it on fire and you blow it out, it will continue to burn all the way down. It's got stuff in it, saltpeter included in many cases, so that it will continue to do that. When I would make incense sticks, it was all essential oils and just soaking the incense sticks in the essential oils to get the scent that you wanted. Little incense cones are a little bit different because you're making basically the paste that goes on the incense stick and shaping it into a cone. And in that case, where you're like making the whole thing from start to finish, which is tricky because you have to use saltpeter and a couple of things. So it will be self-lighting. So it will stay lit once you put a flame to it. You can mix all your essential oils into it directly and work with it like a dough and then shape it into little cones. The saltpeter part, because saltpeter is one of those components of gunpowder that makes gunpowder go boom. It's a pretty important chemical in alchemy as well, but it's a primary thing for if you've got the little cones, any of the incenses that they sell in the market right now, like there's stuff in them so that they will stay lit once you put a light to them. There is also, of course, just loose resin and loose incense that we burn over a charcoal. Most of those charcoals are self-lighting. If you've ever lit them, they have a scent all by themselves from the fact that they are self-lighting, and they start to spark and put a lot of their own smoke into the world. One of the things that I've found in doing this is any of the loose incenses that we are probably accustomed to burning directly on a charcoal, we're wasting to some degree by burning them directly on the charcoal. We're using them very quickly, more quickly than we would need to. Putting them on something above the charcoal or in something that's going to warm them rather than melt and burn them has a better effect. And let's the scent.
I am happy.
I'm going to unplug it because this little bugger will stay hot for a while.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, you got it?
Yeah. I got you. Here's a question for you.
I'm moving this because I've almost knocked it down twice now.
Do you have any guidance on how long to use the Kyphi each time people burn it? Is there a point where the smell would get too intense, or should you just go by what feels like the right intensity for you?
With the handmade Kyphi, there's a point where even on low settings, it kind of cooks. And you can visually see that it'll, when you burn it, there'll be a point where it starts to bubble a little bit and it melts and it sort of sploops out a bit. And the bubbling will stop and it starts to get hard and it looks like an overbaked cookie. And at the point where it looks like an overbaked cookie, you can keep it on the heat, but it's really not going to give you much after that. I'm trying to track down a one-line reference that I have run across in my research in the past 3 weeks that stated that Cleopatra made the coal for her eyes from burnt frankincense and from the burnt remnants of incense. Now, it is a single line. I have never run across it before, and I want to track it down to make sure somebody wasn't just talking out of their ass, because that happens. But I'm curious because I've saved a lot of the Kyphi once it was cooked, because there's a scent to it, although it is a somewhat burnt scent. Or at least somewhat scorched, even at the lower temperatures. Because I'm curious, can it be used for something else? Like what else could it be used for? Would it be good ground up and turned into the base or part of the base for more traditional little incense cones like we're used to. And I'm not above experimenting with that, even though it's been a long time since I bought saltpeter. Actually, I'm not even sure you can get it reliably. Like, that was the 90s. There were a lot fewer rules. Since it's, you know, it's a component in also fireworks, gunpowder, explosives.
Gotcha. Multi-purpose.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting question. Have you considered doing like small group calls? Back on the topic of TV shows and how they don't quite encompass psychic experiences. Have you thought of like doing calls where you just recount some of the weird stuff that's happened?
Oh, damn. I mean, happily. I mean, half the time these turn into that.
That's fair.
I mean, there are, I will be honest, there are definitely stories that unless it sort of feels like a campfire and everybody's comfortable and cozy and in a place where they're not just going to be like, that's bullshit. And some of that is like, I need to feel comfortable with where they're coming from. There are some experiences I've had that I'm not comfortable just shouting to the world because they're incredibly intense. Much like who knew I was so into herbalism, there's my own beliefs and practices and experiences have been a lot more multifaceted than they sort of necessarily must be presented on TV. But
we are somehow at 10% of battery on this lovely device here.
Well, that might shut us down prematurely.
It might. Yeah, folks really like the idea of weird calls.
Yeah. I'm not.
I didn't know where to take it first.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it.
The Patreon, see if people want to do that.
Because one of the other things I do, especially when I'm educating, is I try to make a very clear line. There's a line of demarcation between I have studied this, there is folklore or other things to back up. Here are what people believe about these things. Here's how we can explore those beliefs. Here's more like the the college version of how this stuff works, or at least how the general paranormal community may think it works. And I keep a real clear line between, and here's what I believe personally. What I believe personally based off of my own experiences, I try to keep separate from what I'm citing, what I can go point to, like, well, Colin Wilson in his book on poltergeist says this, as opposed to Harry Price on his book on poltergeist who says this, although Harry Price is probably where the belief that poltergeists can somehow siphon energy from people and even electronics may come from. First place I read about it anyway. But like those two places, I try to keep apart. And
so much enthusiasm,
allowing for a place where I could be like, well, I don't expect you to believe this, but here's this thing that I've
that's
experienced.
Perfect for campfire story time.
Yeah,
like that's what, like the oldest campfire stories I know are all in that like half real, half this happened to me, half it's a story and it didn't happen to them.
Well, I mean, it's honestly, it's like haunting experiences. Like that collection of stories was a collection of real ghost stories and real encounters, several of which involve things that, like, at the time where I'm like, yep, I'm writing ghost stories, but I'm also going to include this thing where, like, for real, guys, I'm pretty sure this was fairies. And and then, going sky watching with Uncle Ray and some of the weird stuff that happened there. Never saw like little green men or like literal landings of things, but I will say I definitely saw some weird stuff in the skies. And if you are really big into ufology, the town I grew up in, Hinckley, Ohio, I know for a fact that there were multiple UFO sightings in the early 70s in the town. It was something that the family and Uncle Ray especially talked about a lot. I don't know if those records are still available, but apparently there was a UFO flap there right around the time that I was an itty bitty baby. So
Here's an interesting question. So talking about incense cones is reminding someone of the cones that are seen in Egyptian tomb paintings on top of the heads of women. Do you know if there was any association between Kyphi and those cones?
I haven't found a direct link between Kyphi and those cones, mainly because Kyphi had medicinal and also like it was eaten as a breath mint. And those cones were basically personal perfumery. So it was like a dense mix of fats and oils and scented oil. And so like the idea was like it, as you warmed through the day, like it was sort of weirdly underarm deodorant like for, I don't know how to describe it, but it would melt on you and help to scent you.
Neat. That's
yeah,
news to me.
Yeah, and so they were they'd be more like shea butter kind of stuff than like an incense cone. Although there would be certainly if I had to guess what you would have scented that with, I mean, frankincense and myrrh were like widely used in a lot of things. But roses and attar of roses were pretty important as well throughout the Middle East. It wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't rose or lotus in there. And this is conjecture. I have not found. Actually, you know, it makes me want to go dig around in Lise Manish's Sacred Luxuries. Because I skipped straight to her section on Kyphi, and if there's a book that would go into like what went into those, I'm wondering if there was a chapter I skipped that mentions a little thing about those.
Interesting. I can definitely see that.
I think we're setting up an adjustment so that you can.
I'm preparing to move the iPad, which has plenty of battery life.
Yeah.
Past the phone, which is about to die, so you get a second view of the
Valkyrie is about to die.
We're going to be sitting on top of these board games.
Wizard needs food badly. I am a child who played arcade games in the 80s.
Oh dear. All right.
Is that good?
Yeah, that
cool.
is. All right, we will just take the other one out of the picture. Cool. New view, right from the front.
All right. All righty.
So I know there's another box if you wanted to keep on.
Yeah, that one is from the Monterey Bay Spice Company. So that's going to be my not prohibitively expensive myrrh because the Wild Tree Essentials was the like high-end Arabian myrrh, $85 for a pound.
It's okay, I already blacked it out.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Safe.
Good. Yeah, there's a couple of old pictures with Cornelius that I realized you could see a shipping box in the background. I'm like, oh, hopefully that's not terrible. Okay, this one's much more fun.
Oh, goody.
This one has myrrh gum. And if you remember the stuff from the Arabian myrrh, like just this myrrh gum looks quite different.
It really does.
Yeah, it's like anything. There's multiple grades. Like there's high grade and then like on down through a couple of different. This is my benzoin gum powder. Benzoin gum is it's got a sweet vanilla scent. If you ever buy incense that claims to be amber, that is not actually fossil amber, it is not ambergris, which, if you really know where that comes from, it's gross because it's whale vomit. But the stuff that's ordinarily marketed as amber is usually a mix of benzoin and a couple of other things. Benzoin has this very sweet, cloying, almost vanilla scent to it. It is a natural preservative and sodium benzoate. And it is, if you have received Kyphi from me, there's a very, very light dusting of something on it that you might mistake for rice flour. It's this stuff. It makes the Kyphi just a little bit easier to roll and work with. And as one of the ingredients that appears in later recipes of Kyphi, it's one of the things that I felt comfortable, like I wasn't going to corrupt the Kyphi with like a weird scent.
Ooh, fun.
And this is bee pollen.
Huh.
Yep.
That is so weird.
Little bits of pollen off of the hips of bees. Why did I pick up bee pollen? Because bees and honey and all of the things that came from bees were sacred to the ancient Egyptians. And there's some stuff that I'd run across that the direct translation was not saying, hey, this is bee pollen, but there's enough that made me want to play around with it and go, okay, could they have meant this? Is this something they were working with? So some of this is just pure experimentation. Spearmint. Not Egyptian mint, but there are live Egyptian mint that will be showing up at the door probably at the beginning of June from a company. So there's many, many different varieties of mint. And mint is one of the things, like not a lot of it goes into Kyphi, but a small amount does. And if you are familiar with peppermint, spearmint, each one has a slightly different like pungency and astringency. Catnip is also in the mint family, and does have a mild mint flavor, but nothing like the mint that you put in your tea. Egyptian mint, everything I've read, it's closer to apple mint, and maybe catmint. It's a milder mint, and that really tracks with when I first saw that mint was one of the translated, like, we totally know that this is the thing that goes in the Kyphi. I'm like, yeah, but all those other scents, how does that go? But a milder mint would make a lot more sense. So this is in case that doesn't pan out, because it was kind of hard to track down Egyptian mint to grow in my yard. Mint being mint, however, I expect that once I get it established, it will take over. So that's more benzoin. I wasn't shy about the benzoin. When I was doing the Kyphi stuff, like it was before all of this happened, and benzoin was really easy to find. Pounds of it. And like not powdered either. Like it's a gum like a lot of the other ones. So like finding the Styrax benzoin gum was really easy to find. Not anymore.
I've got an ingredients question for you.
Yeah.
Is saltpeter the same as gum mastic?
No, completely different. I'm trying to think of like what's the. I can only think of it as saltpeter. Gum mastic is a tree resin from. I'm gonna murder the scientific name, Pistis lenticulus, I think. Basically a variety of pistachio, if I'm not mistaken. And it is a gum that is, at this point, mainly only produced by the island of Chios in Greece. So you'll see it marketed as Chios, Chios gum, or it'll look like an X, but it's the Greek X that is also pronounced Chios. It's used in a number of culinary things. So I have found that gum mastic there's a proprietary liqueur called mastiha that is made from gum mastic. There is a jam that is a dessert jam that is made out of it. There is a particular type of Greek bread and cookie that also uses it as a key ingredient to give it its distinctive taste. And the gum itself, just plucked off the trees, is chewed to help with mouth sores, digestive issues, reflux, flatulence, just pretty much like it's supposed to help like right on down your digestive tract. People swear by it.
Does spearmint work better?
I found that I liked spearmint over peppermint because peppermint has an even stronger, it's called peppermint because it's almost got a peppery mint strength. So peppermint was a little too strong. Spearmint leaned a little bit more toward where I thought the milder scent should go. And I'm really eager to have the Egyptian mint show up, Nilotica mentha, to just kind of go, do sniff test and see what's there. We've got just like wild mint growing in the backyard, which could be, It's closest to what I've seen local stores sell as chocolate mint, like the square. So you can recognize something from the mint family because the stalks. It's you've got a main stalk and you've got like little leaves around it, but the stalk is square. And if you crush it, there is that distinctive mint scent in most of the things that are related to mint. Lemon balm slightly different because it's got more of a citrusy smell. But chocolate mint, or at least the things that are sold as chocolate mint, have a mild, very sweet mint smell, and then the stalks are dark purpley, so it almost looks like chocolate and mint.
Yum.
It's really good for tea. Speaking of tea, rooibos. There's an ingredient in Kyphi called aspalathos, and it's one of the debated ones, but the scientific name for the stuff that makes rooibos is aspalathos. So, and in various variations of that, Aspalathus linearis is this particular one. And while this is more native to southern Africa, there are varieties that would have been gathered in the area. And to be fair, the Egyptians had such an extensive trade network, and they really spared no expense when it came to bringing in sacred scents and luxuries. So it's not too much of a stretch to assume that they had stuff coming from South Africa too. And what else do we have in here? Some more juniper berries, which were also a big important thing in it. The only thing that was hard about the juniper berries in the traditional Kyphi recipe is they mention juniper berries, the large and the small. So clearly from the language, they're talking about two different varieties that they identify as juniper berries. Probably two different sources. We have no way of knowing why it was important to have both the large ones and the small ones, if there was a different intensity, a different flavor, a different whatever. But at this point we have juniper. It's used as a seasoning and a spice. Don't eat it by the handful. It's good with venison. It's used in gin and a couple of other things. It's got a sharp, piney scent and taste to it. And then
general herbal question.
Yeah.
What is belladonna?
Oh, the word means beautiful lady. It is poisonous. So certainly don't go ingesting it. It is medicinally, if you've ever gone to the optometrist and they've put drops in your eyes to make your pupil dilate, that is derived from belladonna. It has a substance in it called atropine, and the root of that word is atropos. If you're familiar with the fates, you've got Clothos, Lachesis, and Atropos. Clothos, who weaves the thread of life, Lachesis, who measures it, and Atropos is the old lady who cuts it. And atropine is so named because it is deadly. It can, much like digitalis, be used in certain medicinal circumstances very carefully. It is one of those herbs that you do not want to use in herbalism because the refined measurements and applications that are necessary to use it safely, we won't have access to as just garden variety herbalists. So if you read about medical applications of belladonna, don't experiment. Belladonna is one of those plants that was postulated to be part of the witch's flying ointment because of the impact that atropine has on the system, in addition to hellebore and mandrake and a bunch of other things that would have been incredibly dangerous to use at all, but certainly would have given you a wild fucking trip if you did. If you're curious about what I'm talking about with witch's flying ointment, in the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, so 1400s, 1500s, and 1600s in Europe, there was a time period where society kind of went a little crazy, collectively and became convinced that witches were out to destroy society and were casting curses on their neighbors and were just basically raising hell, literally, in the woods, eating babies, sacrificing things. And because of this belief, they went around from village to village killing a lot of people. If you happen to be pagan of any flavor or a practitioner of witchcraft modernly of any flavor, you have probably heard of the witch craze or the burning times, and that goes back to them. But one of the accusations from that time was that witches had a flying ointment. They would strip naked at night, they would cover their bodies in the flying ointment, and then they would go whoop up the chimney, often on a broom, and ride off with a mad bunch of their naked witchy cohorts, and then meet deep in the woods with Satan and have sex with him, often in the form of a goat, sometimes in the form of a large black man, and let's not even get into the racial implications of that. And then they would boil and burn or consume any of the infants born from that union. They called them witches' sabbats. Let's also mention that they called them sabbats because they were incredibly anti-Semitic at the time. Jews had sabbats, so must witches, because at the time they believed that Jews worked against Christianity, would steal the host and stick nails in it and do all kinds of horrible stuff. So let me be really clear that the witch craze was one great big seething fucking pile of racism, sexism, and anti every belief system but Christianity that festered to a point where people were literally killing people just because they didn't believe the way they did. It's a really ugly period of European history. There is no way to calculate how many people were murdered. On the continent, they were often burned. There were lots of other colorful people who were burned along with them. That's where the word faggot comes as a slur, because they usually rounded up the gay people and they burned them first, along with the faggots on the fire, which the original word for faggot, the original meaning was just basically the wood that you fed a fire with. So when you call someone a faggot, you are calling them someone worthy of being burned for what they are. Just FYI. Anyway, so it was really a fucked up period of history. I did my undergrad dissertation on it. And the bits of it that kind of leak into Shakespeare, because he was writing at the time during the height of it. There's a lot of stuff that sort of spilled over into the States. All of the stuff that happened with the Salem witch trials is a part of that, although in the States it was expressed a little bit differently, and because the States were connected to England at the time, they did not burn witches, they hung them. On the continent, they burned them because it was a crime against the church, and therefore it fell underneath the purview of the Inquisition and related things to the Inquisition. In England, which had broken off from the Catholic Church, it was a crime against the state. And you have one particular monarch to thank for a lot of English witchcraft beliefs and fervor, and that would be King James, same one who rewrote the Bible. And there's a whole lot to dig in with that, and that is probably a 5-part class, honestly, if I want to get into it. And yeah, it's an ugly time. It's really worth doing a little research on right now, because weirdly I was thinking about this just the other day. Like I actually kind of processed the thoughts with Illyria when I was doing that paper back in 1990. No, I went to college, it was 91, so 93 to 94. I couldn't wrap my head around this sort of like mass hysteria that happened, and like everybody writing about the witch craze would describe it as mass hysteria. Like literally people believed, there's a whole book about this, like whole chapters devoted to witches at this time period were believed to steal men's penises. I kid you not, you can look this up in Malleus Maleficarum.
steal men's penises as a way of getting back at them, something, stealing their vitality, I don't know. And they would keep the penises, which were like apparently little critters all by themselves, up in nests high in trees, and feed them on like milk and blood. Like, and there's illustrations for like it's some of the most bizarre shit you could possibly imagine. Like, I've read some arguments that, oh well, there was ergotamine in the grain, which is a fungus that can get into rye and has a psychedelic effect. But I really think that that was people stretching for like some belief to explain how people could just suddenly go so far around the bed, and not just one person, like whole sections of society became completely inflamed by these beliefs that had nothing to do with the reality around them. Like, now, certainly they had people like the folks who wrote the Malleus Maleficarum, wanted them to believe this, wanted them to like be stoked with fear, wanted them to hunt their neighbors down, kill them, and have them tried so the church could then take all of their stuff, as if you were found guilty. If you were found to be a witch, all of your property was forfeit to the church. So on one hand, it was this massive land grab. But people really honestly believed that their neighbors were stealing their dicks, among other things. That their neighbors were making all of their cattle die of hoof and mouth disease or of anthrax. That they're, the little old lady who lived down the street and was losing her teeth, whose husband had died like 20 years before. And so she's living alone, she's barely making it, and she's probably like doing some herbal stuff on the side just to get herself by. She's totally out there casting the evil eye on everyone. And the only way you're going to know is if you strip her naked and you stab her enough times until you find that one spot that doesn't bleed. People believed that. People acted on that. And yet the madness of crowds. Belief is a very, very powerful human capacity, and it's a very, very dangerous one, especially once it becomes politicized, especially if there are bad actors who are manipulating people's beliefs, inflaming them, especially capitalizing on their fear of their neighbors, on their fear and misunderstanding of disease and contagion, on the fact that they are honestly upset about calamity and looking for someone to blame. And that's what gave us the witch craze not all that long ago. So hopefully we learn better. Anyway, didn't mean to go somewhere that dark, but it's been on my mind. Anyway, cheaper frankincense. Whee! Boswellia carteri. The second name in all of these, because I've got like Boswellia sacra, Boswellia, half a dozen other things, is sort of like the variety of trees. So we know it's a frankincense tree, and this is the one that is native to this one spot, or this is the one that has like this variety. So cheaper than the stuff that we had picked up from Wild Tree Essentials. Not entirely sure if this was sustainably harvested. Like, one of the things that I like about Wild Tree is it's named Wild Tree because it is wild harvested. It's not just turning precious things like this into an industry. But anyway. Ooh, and I got a catalog.
What fun.
Actually, yeah, Herbal, they've got some really good prices and some good stuff. And they've got like an organic section. I think they're more aimed at people who are doing stuff for like, herbal supplements and homeopathy and whatnot, but perfectly good for incense supplies as well.
So there's a question for you. Was the pentagram initially or originally a Christian symbol?
Much like the swastika, the five-pointed star belonged to a lot of different belief systems and a lot of different cultures. It shows up many different places. I want to draw this. Do you have a Sharpie somewhere?
Oh yeah.
Give me a Sharpie and a piece of paper.
There you go.
Okay. This is the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph for star. Kind of badly done. It almost looks like something from Blair Witch.
Oh no.
There we go. That's better. That. So five rays. You will find that on the ceiling of tombs that are 3,000, 4,000 years old. So the star as a 5-pointed glyph is very, very, very old. Its incorporation into magic and witchcraft. Oh wow! So there's a whole lot of different ways in which that came about. It's popularized and almost claimed as sort of like the holy symbol of Wiccans and witches in the 20th century. And there's at least some roots of that in the 1800s, but it was also at that point being used by the Order of the Eastern Star, which is a branch, the women's branch of Freemasonry. I have not read any scholarly work to this effect, but it is worthy to note that many of the folks who are at the core of what grew into, in one direction, the modern magical and witchcraft movement started off as Freemasons, or at least many of their people did. So Mote It Be was originally a Freemason thing. There is, it's something you can Google whack on Google Books, and I'm trying to remember the name. I think it is the Isis Urania Temple. Don't quote me on that one. I need to look it up. But there is part of a Freemason ritual in it, and it ends with "So mote it be." And it is the first time I had seen that phrase used outside of modern witchcraft. So what that told me was there was a little bit more cross-pollination going on, which then makes me wonder if the 5-pointed star in a circle, which is the symbol of the Order of the Eastern Star, if that's important for women in Freemasonry, where is there some sort of connection that happens? Possibly not. It may go back further. The Sabbatic goat and Baphomet, and that is something that is presented in the writings of, I will probably mispronounce his name, I've only ever seen it spelled, Eliphas Levi or Levi, Levi. He's writing around the earlier half of the 1800s, has a big influence on magic and the occult aspects of magic and this whole development. But there are also symbols in ceremonial magic known as pentagrams and pentacles, some of which are 5-pointed stars, but not all of which. And they are intricately wound up with the Solomonic tradition and the beliefs that these sigils are used to summon and invoke, occasionally bind, banish, or protect from various types of spirits, some of which are celestial in the sense of the planets, so planetary is a better word for that, some of which are demonic, with the caveat that you really need to read a little bit more from that tradition before you go, ooh, demons, when I say demonic in that system. It's much more complicated than that. And those images go back easily to 15th century, probably before that. And the question then arises of where did they come from in that system? Notably, a 5-pointed star is all the way back in early Egyptian tomb iconography. It is the word for star. So the one thing I can say is seals, sigils. A sigil is basically an image, kind of like language, but not like a, I'm blanking on kind of like a pictograph. If you follow Greg and Dana Newkirk, they do a lot of work with sigils from a modern perspective. But the seal or sigil of Solomon goes back to an extra biblical tradition that King Solomon, who is a fairly key figure in the Old Testament and the Torah, that he was given by God this ring with a seal in it that gave him control over demons. In Islamic faith, it's not demons, it's jinn. That's a whole nother kettle of fish and a whole nother presentation to sort of like explain where and how that splits off. And that's relevant to this because those beliefs, those writings about Solomon date back to, at the very latest, 200 CE and probably at least 300 BCE. So this is something that's been around for, at the minimum, 2,000 years. The concept of these symbols, and you definitely see in the Solomonic tradition a five-pointed star, which is probably more of an explanation than you were banking on. What I will tell you is the idea of if it's point up, it's good, and if it's point down, it's bad, is a relatively modern development. And the star of Baphomet, the star of the Sabbatic goat, is really popularized as something that is satanic by a fellow by the name of Anton Xander LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan in the 60s as kind of an anti-religion, anti-organized religion movement. Kind of a big FU to all of the patriarchal stuff that says that you have to worship a sky daddy, and if you don't, your life isn't worth anything. LaVeyan Satanism is a lot more complicated than we worship Satan, but shock value was a part of the way he put things together. And that symbol of the Sabbatic goat in an upside down five-pointed star was a key bit of iconography for them.
So I think I'm going to take just one more question, because I see that you've been standing for a while and your back is sore. Don't want that to go on too much longer.
My throat's getting a little scratchy too, and I'm starting to be like,
I know.
Oh, but there's these things, and there's other stuff. I'm like, I need a whiteboard, or actually what I need that kind of conspiracy theorist, okay, so actually there's a Solomon thing over here, but that's actually over here, and it connects to this thing, and I don't know what the connection to Egypt is, but there's some stuff and some crossover, and let's not even get into the Picatrix and astral magic and all the stuff that probably got lost in the library of Alexandria, and
probably for the best, but also fun. Okay, so our last question for today is, what do you think of the Pendle witch case? If you're familiar.
It sounds familiar, and I'm pulling up a blank. Give me a little bit more context.
Okay, that might take a little while, given the time lag.
Okay. The Pendle witch case. Is it?
That was
I don't know. Is it recent? Is it an old? Because I'm going Bell Witch.
Theophane, if you have more to ask. Or more details.
Yeah, more details would be great.
We'll try to take that. In the meantime, I will ask you, where can people find all the cool stuff that you do these days?
I mean, these days, well, there's my website, michelbelanger.com, and you can just kind of go browsing through there. My lovely wife has done a pretty good job of trying to help you navigate all of the stuff that I do, from books and music and fiction, and I mean the gaming isn't even up there.
Oh gosh, no.
And the Kyphi is sort of up there, but it doesn't really give you a sense of exactly how deep that rabbit hole goes. The classes are up there. And then another place to look is patreon.com/haunted. And that is a place where toss a coin to your witcher. Give a little bit of money for various levels of access. Basically, it's where at the top two tiers, 15 and 25 a month, you have access to voice chats, classes. Currently, one of the things that everybody has access to is a 5-part class on healing with energy, which you can buy into. Even if you're not a patron, for $50 for the whole thing. It's a super duper deal because we're all in quarantine. And I really just wanted to get used to doing this kind of class over this, because usually I reserve most of the energy work classes for in person, because there are some elements that are very hands-on. So it's a little bit of a test for me, it's a little bit of a test for you, but so far everybody is having a blast with it. We're covering all kinds of stuff and going into some pretty deep dives about everything from differences in energy bodies and soul types, and not just like how to read your aura, but like how do you get in there and fix stuff, and what happens if your particular body is different physically or otherwise. How do you work around disabilities and just quirks, and just it's been fun.
Yeah.
Do we have a little bit more in
Yes,
Pendle? Okay.
we do. So the trials of the Pendle witches in 1612 are among the most famous witch trials in English history.
Are those the ones with Grey Malkin? There's a really famous woodcut of 3 women hanging, and you've got their.
So there were 12 accused.
Okay.
They lived in the area around Pendle Hill in Lancashire, and they were charged with murders of 10 people via witchcraft.
I've got to say that I think I do not have a great deal of exposure to it, but I'm probably going to run off and go down a Google rabbit hole. Like there's a vague bit of like, I think I ran across it, and most of the work I was doing for the witchcraft thesis was the relevance and how it was presented in Shakespeare, particularly with this was funny because one of my advisors was, but what do you mean by misogyny? Anyway, a lot of how I steered the thesis was how were these beliefs at the time then represented in Shakespeare's work. So there's a lot of Shakespeare in there as well. Two undergrad degree things. Actually, it was almost 3, but I opted out of psych. Religious studies and British literature. And British literature was largely because I had a fantastic Shakespeare. I can't talk anymore. I'm so excited about like looking into this witchcraft trial. I had a fantastic Shakespeare professor. His name was Christopher Rourke, Dr. Christopher Rourke. If you read my Shadowside series, there's a character who is not based on him at all, but shares his last name, and is a ginger like he was. And he was one of those professors that comes around like once in a lifetime, who not only gets you, but like completely gives you free rein to just let your brain go wherever it wants to go. And he passed away without me, like, he was only 10 years older than me. And I reached out when I was writing the Shadowside series with the character named after him to like let him know, get permission, something like that. And then I found out that he was dead suddenly and unexpectedly. But he was why Shakespeare. Because otherwise everybody's like, but why not the Romantic poets? And I'm like, well, I've got a very mixed relationship with Byron.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for the unboxing and asking all these wonderful questions to get Michelle up on the tangents we all love.
Witches, misogyny, terrible periods of history,
and bee pollen. All right.
And those neat little bits of like scented oil stuff that Egyptian women would wear on their head and let it just sort of melt into their wigs.
I would totally do that. Without a wig though. But let's not get into that.
Yeah.
Everybody have a wonderful night. And thank you for joining us for a little while.
Bye.
We'll chat at you again soon.